one big family in this together today. Can everyone come and circle up around us?
Welcome to the fourth week of 40 days of moral resistance as part of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. This is a powerful movement happening all over the country, and you are part of it. My name is Avery Bilk. I'm part of the Poor People's Campaign Coordinating Committee, and I'm also with the Vermont Worker Center. All right! I wanted to introduce our first speaker. It's the Reverend Joan Javier Duval of the Unitarian Church of Montpelier. Been a supporter of this campaign from the get-go, and that church has really been a hub of local activity.
That there is a movement afoot, a new and unsettling force made of people from all walks of life, united in our belief that the moral narrative of our nation must change. United in our belief that it is time to lift up and call out the connected evils of poverty, systemic racism, the war economy, and ecological devastation. It is time to declare that we will not be silent anymore, and we will keep returning here until all are fed. We'll keep coming back until we study war no more. That's right. We'll keep on moving forward until all are able to get the health care they need to survive and to thrive. We will continue witnessing and speaking and singing out until we live in harmony with our planet and at peace with our siblings around the world.
Amen.
As we gather today, I hope that you will listen closely. Listen to the truth, the pain, and the determination in the stories that are shared here. This is the reason we are here. We are here for each other, and we will not be silent anymore.
The next speaker you may have already recognized. He is a national figure in the movement for climate justice with 350 nationally, and has been a real thinker and outspoken activist around the urgent issues that face us when it comes to climate justice. Please welcome Bill McKibben.
Well, thank you. What a pleasure to get to join you all today. I just want to continue this discussion of connections for a minute. Connections between environmental destruction and bad health and poverty. I want to talk about them at different levels. Let's think about Vermont first and think about what's going on here, right around us. You know, as the temperature warms, one of the things that's happening is we see every year the ticks get a little further up the mountain and a little further up the valley, and to the point now where we have a whole set of diseases we didn't even think about 10, 15 years ago. Now we not only have to deal with them, we have to deal with them psychologically. There are people who do not want their children out in the woods anymore. Nobody quite goes for a walk across the meadow with just the same sort of ease that they did a decade ago. In Vermont, when the temperature got too high and the water off the Atlantic seaboard got too warm, and we had our hurricane in 2011, one of the things we learned in Vermont was who lived in the floodplain in Vermont. And who lived in the floodplain were people who lived in trailer parks. And that's who got washed away in our greatest natural disaster. Now, this same lesson applies at the next level up, the level of the nation. Think about the last year or so in our country. We had in Texas the biggest rainstorm in American history. Hurricane Harvey dropped 4.5 feet of rain, 54 inches of rain on parts of Texas. And what did we learn right away again? We learned who lived down low, we learned who was really in the way, and we learned whose houses didn't get rebuilt inside of a few months. We learned who got dislocated and lost, and then 2 weeks after Harvey, Hurricane Maria comes to Puerto Rico, we've never quite seen anything like that. A Category 5 hurricane goes straight across the middle, right down the middle of a big populated part of the United States. By the time it was done, it had done unbelievable economic damage, okay? Cementing the poverty of Puerto Rico. The GDP of Puerto Rico in 2016 was $101 billion. We think that Hurricane Maria so far done about $90 billion worth of damage. That's a year wiped away. The economists say it'll be another 25 years before Puerto Rico is back to where it was economically last summer, and that's if it doesn't get hit by another hurricane in the meantime. But of course, that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was what we learned this week, which was, while nobody in the federal government was paying the slightest bit of attention, people were dying and dying not by the tens and not by the hundreds, but by the thousands. The Harvard study that came out last week showed that 4,645 people had perished as a result of that hurricane, making it the biggest natural disaster in America in a century, except it's not really a natural disaster. We can't really use that phrase anymore. You know, when you look at the insurance policy, it talks about acts of God. Anymore, this is not what we're talking about. Our thumb is on the scale. When we talk about keep it in the ground, that's why, because there is a direct relationship between that which we dig up and burn and that which comes back to haunt us in 100 ways, in fire and in flood and in disease. Take it on up to the next level, the last level, the level of the entire globe, and you realize precisely the same thing. You know, Dr. King, who started the Poor People's Campaign, at the end of his life, he was not just launching the Poor People's Campaign, he was talking more and more and more about connections around the planet, about the need for a kind of international solidarity. We started 350.org in Vermont, but it now, a decade later, works in 188 countries around the world. And one of the things that became incredibly clear very early on was that the idea that I'd heard over and over in my life, that environmentalism was something that rich white people did, and if you didn't know where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist, that was nonsense. That most of the people we work with, most of the people who lead this fight around the world are poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what most of the world is made up of. Okay? And there is an almost perfect inverse correlation between how much of this problem you caused and how quickly and how badly you feel its effects. I remember being 15 years ago in Bangladesh when this really struck me. Bangladesh, a very beautiful, fertile country in the delta where the great sacred river of that part of Asia, the Brahmaputra, pours out of the Himalayas into the Bay of Bengal. And I was there to do some reporting because it's suffering over the long run from climate change as the waters of the Bay of Bengal rise, as those glaciers dwindle. But while I was there, they were having an acute problem. They were having their first big outbreak of dengue fever, a disease that the World Health Organization says is the emergent disease of this century, because the mosquito that spreads it, Aedes aegypti, dearly likes the warm, wet world that we are building on its behalf, okay? So everybody there was very freaked out because they'd never seen dengue before. And so there were big posters out to show people what the mosquito looked like and what the symptoms were. And I spending a lot of time in the slums in Dhaka, so eventually I got bit by the wrong mosquito, and I was as sick as I'd ever been, but of course I was healthy and strong and well-fed going in, so I didn't die, but lots of people were dying. I remember being in the clinic that they'd set up in downtown Dhaka, and there were beds stretched out as far as you could see with people's cots, with people just sort of shivering on them. There's no treatment. There is no treatment for dengue because only poor people have ever gotten it, so why would you bother to have a treatment for it? But what struck me most looking at that was just how unbelievably unfair it is. The UN tries to measure every year how much carbon each country on the planet emits. You can't even really get a number for the 180 million people who live in Bangladesh. They're pretty much a rounding error in the calculations. Okay? When I saw that, when I came back home, it struck me all the much harder that the 4% of us who live in this country have put 25% of all the carbon that ever got put in the atmosphere up there. And that we're going to have to figure out how to take responsibility for that and do something about it. So these questions about poverty and health care and the environment are deeply and irretrievably linked. It makes so much sense that we are here talking about those three things in the same breath. You know, Dr. King was killed before the environmental movement was at its absolute apogee, before the first Earth Day. But one of the things about being a prophet is you can see a little further into the future, and he could. Dr. King said once, it really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one destiny affects all. That's where we are. That's why we're here together. That's why this fight has to go on. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, not quite an accident, some of the stories we're hearing today, some of the things we're hearing, right? Because the same system that creates these problems, it's one system, right? It's one system that creates an immense amount of wealth for a powerful few while leaving the rest of us fighting for crumbs and under attack. I'm actually going to share another Dr. King quote before we move forward. He said, "There are 40 million poor people here, and one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising a question about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy, and I'm simply saying that more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. We are called upon to help the discouraged beggars in life's marketplace. But one day, we must come to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. It means that questions must be raised, and you see, my friends, when you deal with this, you begin to ask the question, who owns the oil? You begin to ask the question, who owns the iron ore? You begin to ask the question, why is it that people have to pay water bills in a world that is 2/3 water? These are words that must be said.
I'm really proud of the fact that an interfaith thing is going to have a pagan speak, because that doesn't happen all that often. And I'm a proud witch. I'm a descendant of those that they could not burn. And I'm here to tell you that we are rising. So our big thing today is the environment. Who but the pagans, the indigenous people, have the most to say about the environment, because it is our religion. The earth is sacred. The earth is alive. We are a part of a living system, and all parts of it are sacred. Water is sacred.
Yes.
Selling water is immoral.
It's immoral.
The earth is calling us to change our ways. The Penobscot have a vision, they have a vision that when the earth is really, really hurting, the cannibal giant comes out of the forest and wreaks destruction. And they say that's what's happening now. And we have to turn it around. We have to get that cannibal giant back under control, and knowing that the earth is safe and that we are no more plundering her and raping her. Minnie Waconie.
Somebody's been taking our health care, and it's gone on far too long. Said it's gone on far too long. Gone on far too long. Somebody's been taking our health care, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore.
And the vast majority of us, the 140 million poor people in this country, rather than being united as one force, we are divided and often pitted against each other. And so when we come here today, when we stand here in solidarity, when we say we are going to put an end to systemic racism, an end to poverty, an end to the war economy, an end to ecological devastation, and we're going to do that united and taking care of each other and changing the moral narrative, that is exactly what is needed to get at the root of all of these problems.
The second week we came and we spoke out against racism and the connections between systemic racism and poverty, and heard powerful testimony about racism here in Vermont and efforts to overcome that and build this force, this fusion movement. And then last week we came together around the war economy and militarism, and heard the ways in which we're impacted all over the world, how poor people and people of color are particularly impacted. Heard from directly impacted people, from veterans, and really spoke out about the ways in which the war economy has been intertwined with all these different issues. And as you've heard today, we're here again with the theme of health and the environment. And this isn't just a list of issues. This is about a system where these issues are intricately intertwined, and about a moral fusion movement. When we come together around these intertwined issues, we can really challenge the 1% at the top and change this system so it works for all of us and it works for the planet.
In 2013, the last year where you can get data on the Ag website, almost 62,000 pounds of atrazine were used in Vermont, most of it in Edison and Franklin counties. Atrazine can cause frog deformities. What does it do to us? AstraZeneca co-owns Syngenta, which manufactures atrazine, which increases the risk for breast cancer, breast, ovarian, and prostate cancers. AstraZeneca produces a drug used to treat breast cancer. Are Arimidex, interesting connection. They also made tamoxifen. So if we drink water, breathe air, and eat food contaminated with atrazine, then AstraZeneca has a remedy if we get cancer. We get the cancer, they get the money. What we do to Earth community, we do to ourselves. It's time to stop the atrazine habit. Let's find healthy, safer ways to live with Earth community in Vermont. Thank you.
Jesus healed the sick. He never asked them if they had a pre-existing condition. He never asked for money. He set them free of their illness so that they could go and do good in their communities. Imagine if we could do the same. Imagine. We can. Exactly. That's the way to bring the hope right there. We can, indeed.
We demand a fully funded public water and sanitation infrastructure that keeps these utilities and services under public control, and that prioritize poor, rural, and native communities that have been harmed by polluting and extractive industries.
We demand a ban on fracking, mountaintop removal, coal mining, coal ash ponds, and offshore drilling. We demand a ban on all new pipelines, refineries, and coal, oil, and gas export terminals.
Yes.
We demand the protection of public lands and the immediate cessation of opening up public lands for polluting and extractive industries.
And finally, we demand a budget that promotes the general welfare. A lot of people say a budget is a moral statement. It's a statement of what we want to see in our society, right? It's how we raise and spend revenue and where we put our collective resources as a community.
Health, our lives, our bodies not for sale. We struggle to change a system that has failed. Strange things have happened here, no stranger would it be if healthcare was a human right, the right for you and me. The earth, the air, the water's not for sale. We struggle to change a system that has failed. Strange things have happened here, no stranger would it be if we built a system good for you and me. Did you know that healthcare costs are the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in this country? Ain't no way we're backing down.
Ain't no way we're backing down.
We're rising up, the time is now.
Rising up, the time is now.
Neighbor, neighbor, can't you see?
Neighbor, neighbor, can't you see?
Climate justice is what we need.
Climate justice is what we need.
Ain't no way we're backing down.
Ain't no way we're backing down.
We're rising up, the time is now.
Rising up, the time. Rising up, the time is now.
We're rising up, the time is now.
Rising up,
The time is now.
The reasons all of our issues are connected is because of the system, right, that's designed to keep its own power, to keep its own profits over people. The other connection, though, is the sacredness of life, which we've also been lifting up. The sacredness of the earth, all of its creatures, and all of us, our humanity that is sacred. And finally, the connection, really the thread that's moving throughout this movement is us and is our power. And that is what is on display today all over the country and here in Montpelier. And we are going to use that power and move that power now into this grand house behind us, which is our house. So you're all invited to join us now as we move into a procession into and through the State House. We'll be joining in song, in movement. Our moral witnesses, wherever you are, if you would come forward to lead the way.
We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started.